The evening rush had faded, and the diner was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain against the windows. Sarah sat at the corner table staring at her half-eaten sandwich. Her shift had been long and her tips small, but she was used to that. It wasn't the kind of job that made dreams come true, but it kept the lights on. The bell above the door jingled, and a boy no older than 10 stepped inside. His clothes were soaked and his shoes squished with each step. He looked around shyly before whispering, "Can I get some water, please?" Sarah smiled gently. "Sure thing, sweetheart." She poured him a glass and set it in front of him. He drank it fast, his hands shaking slightly. She watched him for a moment, then asked, quietly, "Have you eaten anything today?" He shook his head, eyes downcast. "My mum's sick. She hasn't had work for a while." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Without a word, she pushed her plate toward him. "Here, eat this." The boy hesitated, staring at the sandwich. "You'll get in trouble," he said. She shook her head, smiling. "I think I'll survive." He took a bite, then another, soon finishing the whole meal. She refilled his water and brought him a cookie from behind the counter. "Don't tell my boss," she said with a wink. For the first time, the boy smiled. "Thank you, miss." When he left, she watched him run through the rain until he disappeared into the night. She didn't know his name or where he lived, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. For the rest of the week, every time she passed the window, she hoped he would come back. He never did. 3 days later, the morning started like any other, until the sound of engines filled the quiet street. 20 black cars pulled up outside one. After another sleek, shining and intimidating, people on the sidewalk stopped to stare. Sarah stepped to the window, confused, as men in suits began stepping out of the cars. Then one of them opened the diner door and walked in. The entire staff froze. He looked around and said calmly, "Is there a Miss Sarah Collins here?" She raised her hand, uncertain. "That's me." The man smiled politely. "My name is Michael. I represent Mr. Henry Wallace. He asked me to deliver something to you." She frowned. "I don't know. Anyone by that name?" He nodded. "I believe you do, Miss Collins. You fed his son 3 nights ago in this very diner." Sarah's breath caught. Her mind flashed back to the boy in the rain. Michael continued quietly. "Mr. Wallace is one of the largest business owners in the city. His son ran away from home after his mother passed away. You were the only one who stopped to help him. The boy told his father that an angel in an apron gave him food when he was starving. He wanted to find you to say thank you before." Sarah could speak. Another man entered the diner, tall, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes. It was the billionaire himself, Henry Wallace. He walked up to her and said softly, "My son wouldn't stop talking about you. He told me that kindness still exists, and I needed to see it for myself." She stammered, "Sir, I just gave him my lunch." He shook his head. "You gave him more than food, you gave him faith." He turned to Michael, who handed her a folder. Inside were documents, ownership papers for the diner. "Henry said I bought this place this morning. It's yours now. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll keep feeding people who need it." Sarah stood speechless, her co-workers staring in disbelief. Henry smiled kindly. "The world needs more people. Like you, Miss Collins, people who help without asking why." That night, as she closed the diner for the first time as its owner, she looked at the empty table by the window and whispered, "Thank you, little one. You brought me the biggest tip of my life." The next morning, sunlight spilled through Sarah's curtains, brighter than usual. She still couldn't believe what had happened the day before. The diner she had worked at for years was now hers. Every corner of that place carried her memories of exhaustion, laughter and struggle. She woke early, brewed her coffee, and walked to the diner keys jingling in her trembling hand. When she unlocked the door, the familiar smell of roasted beans and butter hit her, and she smiled. It felt like she was opening more than a shop. It felt like she was opening a new chapter. She stood by the counter, touching the edges of the tables, remembering every shift, every face, and every moment that had led to this. The door opened gently, and a small figure stepped inside. It was the boy, the same little boy she had shared her meal with. His clothes were cleaner, his eyes brighter. He ran up to her, hugging her tightly. "My dad said we can come here any time. He says this is our place too." Sarah knelt down, smiling, and said, "It's everyone's place now, sweetheart." Then she looked up and saw a tall man at the door, Henry Wallace, watching quietly, his expression soft and full of gratitude. He said quietly, "You know, Sarah, when my son ran away, I realized I had built an empire, but not a home. You reminded me what truly matters." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything special," he smiled. "You gave food when you had barely enough for yourself. That's more special than anything money can buy." From that day, Sarah decided to run the diner differently. She started something she called the Pay It Forward table. Anyone who came in could leave a little money for the next person who might not be able to pay. The idea spread quickly. Soon truck drivers, teachers, students, and even city officials were leaving envelopes on the counter, marked for someone hungry. Months later, a journalist came by to write about the story. 20 black cars had drawn attention across the city. The article was titled, "The Waitress Who Fed a Future." It told how a small act of kindness from a woman who had almost nothing built a movement that touched thousands. The diner's new name glowed softly in gold letters above the door. Faith's Corner, named after the boy. Years rolled by, and Sarah's diner became a sanctuary. People came not only to eat, but to feel safe, to feel seen, to remember that even in a world of hurry and greed, kindness still held power. One morning as she brewed her first pot of coffee, she noticed an elderly man sitting quietly in the corner. His clothes were old, his face lined by years. She walked over, smiling. "You look like you could use a warm meal, sir." He smiled back. "That's kind of you, miss." She set down a plate before him and said softly, "No charge. Someone already paid for you." His hands trembled slightly as he looked up and said, "You know, I used to run a diner too many years ago. I lost everything once, but I remember someone helping me when I was hungry." Sarah felt something inside her stir, and she realized the world had come full circle. Kindness had passed from one person to another over and over again, never disappearing, only changing hands. That night, Sarah stood outside Faith's Corner, watching the lights flicker through the windows. She thought about the boy who had started it all and whispered into the cool air, "Thank you, little one. You taught me that the smallest meal shared with love can feed the world." Years passed and Faith's Corner became more than a diner. It became the beating heart of an entire community. People came not only for food, but for peace. A sign by the entrance read, "No one leaves hungry, and everyone leaves seen." The walls were filled with photographs of smiling faces, old and young volunteers, regulars, travelers, all of them bound by one thing, kindness. Sarah never forgot where it all began. Every morning she arrived before dawn, unlocked the same door, and brewed the same pot of coffee. She still poured one cup for herself and one for the memory of that rainy night when a hungry boy had walked in and changed her life. The smell of coffee mixed with fresh bread filled the air, and the first rays of light touched the old wooden counter that had become a witness to miracles. Faith. The boy had grown taller, now a teenager. He worked at the diner every weekend, helping to serve customers, wiping tables and greeting everyone who walked in. He told every new visitor the same story about how one act of kindness turned into a home for hundreds. He loved watching how people's faces softened when they heard it. One morning, a group of children entered with their teacher. They were from a nearby school that partnered with the diner. Sarah walked over, smiling, and handed out plates of pancakes. One of the kids asked shyly, "Miss Sarah, why do you always feed people for free?" She smiled and said, "Because someone once fed me with gratitude before they ever gave me food." The teacher, who had read about her story, wiped a tear and said, "You've built more than a diner. You've built a lesson." A few months later, Sarah received an invitation from the mayor's office. The letter said that Faith's Corner was to be honored with the City Heart Award for its contribution to the community. When she stood on stage at the ceremony, she looked out at the crowd and said quietly, "I didn't build this place alone. It was built by every hand that offered help and every heart that refused to ignore hunger. Money didn't build these walls, kindness did." The applause that followed was loud, but she only smiled humbly because she knew the real applause came every time someone paid for another person's meal. That night, when She returned to the diner. She found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Thank you for giving my son back his faith in people," signed Henry Wallace. The billionaire who had once changed her life had never stopped, supporting her quietly, donating every year but never seeking attention. She placed the note in a frame above the counter, beside a picture of Faith as a little boy holding his first sandwich. Years later, Sarah's hair turned silver, but her smile stayed the same. Faith, now a grown man, took over the diner but refused to change anything. Not the recipes, not the rules, not the pay. It forward table. He once asked his mother, "What should I do when I take your place?" She answered softly, "Just keep feeding people, and never count how much you give, count how much love you leave behind." When Sarah passed away, the entire town gathered outside Faith's corner. Candles lined the street. People shared stories of how she had helped them, fed them, encouraged them. Some said she saved their lives, others said she saved their hearts. The next morning, the sign above the diner glowed brighter under the sunrise. Faith's Corner, home of kindness years. After that, people still came. Some never knew her name, only her story. They would sit by the window sipping coffee, staring at the framed note that started it all, and whisper to themselves, "One meal, one moment, one heart. That's how the world changes." Decades passed, and Faith's Corner still stood on the same quiet street, now surrounded by tall buildings and flashing signs, but its glow never dimmed. The paint on the walls had faded from years of morning sunlight, yet the heart of the diner remained untouched. Every chair, every table, every photo on the wall told a story of someone who had walked in hungry and left with more than food. Faith had grown older and wiser, his hair now carrying the same silver streaks his mother once had. Every morning he opened the doors before dawn, just as she had taught him. He still brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for the memory of the woman who had turned a small act of compassion into a lifetime of love. The air always carried the same smell of coffee and pancakes, and sometimes, when the sunlight hit the counter just right, it almost felt like she was still there, watching, smiling, proud. Faith kept expanding the diner's mission. He started a foundation that built community kitchens in nearby towns, using the same rule as his mother: no one leaves. Hungry volunteers from across the city came to help, and soon the diner's reputation reached far beyond the town's borders. News stations filmed stories about the place where kindness became a business model. Universities invited Faith to speak about leadership through compassion, but he always said the same thing: "I'm not a leader. I'm just my mother's son doing what she taught me." One winter morning, a young woman entered the diner. She looked tired, her clothes worn but her eyes hopeful. She sat by the window, shivering slightly. Faith noticed her and brought a bowl of soup without asking. She looked up, startled. "I don't have money, sir." He smiled gently. "Then it's your lucky day. It's already paid for." She blinked. Paid for by who? He pointed to the sign above the counter that read, "Pay it forward table." She nodded, tears filling her eyes, and whispered, "I'll come back when I can and pay for someone else." Faith smiled. That's how it works. Weeks later, she did come back, but not alone. She brought 3 other people, each one carrying a small envelope. Inside each envelope was enough to pay for dozens of meals. She said softly, "I found work, thanks to someone who saw my worth before I did. I'm here to give back." Faith thanked her. But what he didn't say was that her words echoed everything his mother once told him. Kindness never stops, it only changes hands. Years turned to generations. Faith's Corner became more than a building. It became a story parents told their children about a waitress, a boy and a billionaire whose lives had crossed through one act of love. The diner's walls were now covered in framed letters from people around the world, sharing how the story inspired them to open their own cafes, shelters, and food programs. When Faith grew old, he passed the diner to his daughter and told her the same words his mother once told him: "Never count how much you give, count how much love you leave behind." On the day of his retirement, he brewed 2 cups of coffee, as always, one for him and one for the corner booth by the window. He sat quietly looking at the empty seat and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Thank you, little me, for believing that kindness could feed the world." That night, As the lights flickered off and the last customer left, a soft breeze rustled through the open window. The smell of coffee drifting into the street. A young boy walking by looked inside and asked his father, "Dad, why? Is that seat empty?" The father smiled. "That seat isn't empty, son. It's waiting for the next good heart to sit there." The legend of Faith's Corner lived on, carried not by fame or fortune, but by the endless chain of generosity started by a waitress who once gave away her meal to a hungry boy and proved that compassion could outlive every one of us. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.